Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
Welcome to episode 156. This is Mike, and I'm flying solo today because Wendy's enjoying herself a nice vacation, but she definitely hit some haunted spots, and I'm looking forward to hearing her stories when she comes back for next week's episode. Anyway, while she was gone, Allison from Milwaukee Ghosts and I decided to tackle one of our favorite subjects again, and that's poltergeists. So we have author Jenny Ashford with us today to discuss her 4 different books on poltergeist phenomena. Let's take a listen. Jenny Ashford is an accomplished horror fiction author and graphic artist, but we're talking to her today because of her unparalleled work on one of our favorite subjects, poltergeists. She's written several books on the subject, including her latest, The Unseen Hand, a new exploration of poltergeist phenomena. Also joining us today is Allison from Milwaukee Ghosts, because she just loves poltergeists too. Thank you for joining See You on the Other Side today, guys.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. And I'm glad to be talking to Jenny.
Yes, Jenny. Number one, let's get a little context for you. Where are you from?
I am from Central Florida. I was born in Daytona Beach, but I live in Orlando now.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's like the real life Freaky Links. That's kind of a deep. That's kind of a deep cut.
That is a deep Freaky Links. Like
many people don't remember that, but I always want to be involved in Freaky Links. So
yeah, the fourth greatest paranormal show of 1998.
Come on.
Okay, so Jenny, you're a Floridian, and
Yes.
we'd like to just get started with saying, hey, how did you get involved in this? The first thing you want to say, because most people, when you talk to them about weird stuff, that it's not the first thing. Like me, that's the first thing I come across. Like I'm totally into weird stuff.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are sometimes reticent about it. So it does take a leap of faith to get involved. So how did you get involved in being a weirdo?
Well, gosh, I think I was born a weirdo, really. But I mean, ever since I was a little kid, the only thing I remember is like, oh, I love ghost stories. I love witches. I love all that kind of stuff. And, as I got older, I kind of got more into, I got into the gothic subculture. I got into all that kind of stuff. And I started writing horror stories when I was really young. And it was kind of all I ever wanted to do was just write horror. Especially I was super into Stephen King. I was super into Clive Barker, and I was like into all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And then I was kind of into paranormal stuff too. Like I was interested in ghost stories. I was interested in poltergeists. I didn't know if I really believed it because I'm kind of skeptical about a lot of it. But it was something that I found interesting from a scientific point of view, particularly poltergeist. I was like, if this stuff is really going on, maybe it's some kind of scientific thing that we don't understand yet. And that would be really cool. And so I read a lot of books about that when I was a teenager. And then I kind of, went off more into the horror thing. And then I met my current boyfriend, Tom Ross, about 7-8 years ago. And he told me, we had been together for about a year or two, and he's like, when I was 13, I had a really bad poltergeist. He was the focus of like a poltergeist outbreak, and it was really upsetting. And he told me about it, and I was like, that is the craziest thing I've ever. I'm like, did that really happen? He's like, yeah, I swear it really happened.
And how does that come up in a conversation? I mean, were you guys like in the middle of a game of Vampire the Masquerade or something like that? And he's like,
There's another deep cut right there.
I used to live action role play Vampire the Masquerade.
I remember Vampire the Masquerade. I remember that totally.
I've lived in the goth subculture too. But how does that come up in a discussion? Like, were you watching the movie Poltergeist or The Haunting?
You know
or something?
what? I don't even remember. It might have been. We might have been like watching a horror movie or something. Oh, you know what it was? He said, because I'm super into horror movies and, horror novels and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
And we were talking about horror in general. And he was like, oh, I like some of it, but I don't really like a lot of it because he's like, I've seen the real thing. So the movies and stuff don't really scare me. And so I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, I don't think you're going to believe me, because he knew like how skeptical I was. And I'm like, try me, seriously. So he told me this and I was like, you're right. I don't know if I believe you. I'm like, that is a crazy story. And he's like, no, for real. He's like, it didn't just happen to me. He's like, I was with my aunt and uncle and my cousin at the time. He's like, seriously, call them. They live in California, and talk to them on the phone without me around and ask them about it. And they will tell you the same thing that I told you. All the same details and everything. So I was like, all right, you're on. So I called them and talked to them on the phone, and they told me the exact same story. They said, this happened and this happened and this happened. And I was like, wow, maybe there's like something to this. And then we kind of talked about it a lot over the ensuing years.
That's all I would talk about.
Yeah. And it's like, we talked about it all the time, because he has like a lot of theories about what he thought caused it and stuff like that. And I was like, I was like, I'm a horror fiction writer, but I was like, would you mind if I wrote like a nonfiction book about it? Like, would you be mad? And he's like, no, we'll collaborate on it. We'll write a book. It'll be neat. So that was my first paranormal nonfiction, was Mammoth Mountain Poltergeist, which was about his case. And it was totally taken from his account and his aunt and uncle and his cousin's accounts. They sent me pictures that they took. They sent me like a written thing of everything that happened there. And I just made like a short book out of that. And it was interesting because after that happened, Tom started getting into, like, he got more interested in it, because it happened when he was 13 in the 80s. So he had kind of, put it behind him mostly. But the more we started talking about the book and everything, he's like, I want to find other people who have experienced this kind of thing and talk to them. And I want to talk to parapsychologists about it and all this other kind of stuff. So on, I believe it was on Facebook, he contacted parapsychologist Steve Mera, who is, he's British and he's kind of well known in Britain. He's on TV over there and stuff.
Hello.
Yeah, exactly. He talks just like that. He's from Manchester.
Right, that's how you do it.
Yeah, and so Tom started talking to him, and they became friends, and then we all became friends, and Steve was like, I have a bunch of cases that were really interesting that I investigated, and I don't really have time to, write them in book form. He's like, do you want to like collaborate on a couple of books about some cases that I did? And I was like, sure. So then, we collaborated on one, the Rochdale Poltergeist, that took place in 1996. And then he came over here last year and investigated the Keith Linder haunting, the demons in Seattle. It was on Ghost Adventures. And, after Keith Linder was on Ghost Adventures, where Ghost Adventures were like, we didn't find anything and we think that they're full of crap. And so Keith Linder apparently...
Zach said that?
Yeah.
The bastion of paranormal reliability, Zach Baggins? No. Yeah, I'm sorry, go on.
So he thought nothing happened. And so Keith Linder, the guy whose house it was like, there's really something here going on. And he's like, and apparently after he was kind of brushed off on Ghost Adventures, like he got like a lot of, not death threats, but, people were like emailing him and calling him, like prank calling him and stuff, and his girlfriend left him and all this other kind of stuff.
Oh, his girlfriend left him. That's it. Did she leave him for Zach Baggins? You don't even lift, Keith. You don't even lift.
It's funny because Keith is he's a very large guy. He's like a football player. But yeah, well, she left because of all the negative publicity about it. And she's like, I can't really take it anymore. I don't want anything to do with this. And so she took off. And then, so Keith Linder was like, well, I need, somebody that's like a legitimate parapsychologist to come and, say that something is really happening here. He's like, because people are breaking me over the coals. And so Steve Mera, he's in Britain and he's like, well, I have to go all the way to Seattle and it's expensive and stuff like that. But he initially thought that maybe Keith Linder was exaggerating, but when he did come over here with Don Phillips, who's kind of a sensitive, and they came over and they actually got a lot of the poltergeist activity had diminished by that point, but they did get a lot of evidence that they recorded. And they actually came back 2 times. But they mostly got like a lot of EVPs. It was very strange. Like they didn't hear anything while they were recording, but when they got back to England and played all the tapes back, they're like, there were all these voices on there, like a bunch of different ones.
Now, real quick about the EVPs there. So to me, is it EVPs like in conjunction with a Oculus or I don't know, is that, or a spirit box or something, or just EVPs like they were
straight up
to a recording. That I'm always interested in that because sometimes I think not that anything here is cheating when we're talking about this about the invisible world, but so what kind of EVPs were they?
There were several different ones. They were captured on many different devices, recording devices, cameras, audio recording, all of that kind of stuff. And the weird thing was that a lot of them seemed interactive. Like they didn't hear them at the time, but they heard them later, like I said. Like one example, Don Phillips, he crawled underneath the house. There was like a crawl space underneath the house. And so he went down there to kind of investigate it because they were checking the house from top to bottom.
My hero.
Yeah, right. And so he's crawling down in the hole and he didn't hear or see anything while he was down there. But when they listened to the tape that he made back, there was a man's voice on the tape and it said, clear as a bell, because I've heard it, it's a long house. Almost it was like commenting on what he was doing. Fair enough. Yeah. And he had actually bought some flowers to put in the house and he put them in a vase. And later on, they had a bunch of, they had cameras and audio recording equipment going pretty much the whole time because they were staying at the house. And they stayed there for 8 days the first time, I think, and 6 days the second time. And so these flowers were on the landing. And when they played a tape back that they had recorded around that time, there were 2 women's voices. And one of them said, "Whose are the flowers?" And the other voice said, "That man bought them." So it's almost like they were watching them. And these were not like EVPs like the McDonald's drive-through speaker. Like it's like, rah, rah, rah. They weren't like that. They were like, they sounded like real voices. And no one was there other than the 2 parapsychologists and Keith Linder. There were no women in the house. So it was very strange that a lot of the voices were women. A lot of them had Irish accents too, unusually.
Wow.
Well, what I'm interested in here is, okay, so first of all, we're going to get back to your boyfriend's Poltergeist, because that I'm interested in too, so I can't forget that, but I want to get at here with Keith Linder. Let's give people a little bit of context in case they don't know too much about it. And I assume that some of this stuff is in your new Unseen Handbook?
Yeah, there is. I've written a whole book about the Keith Linder case, or at least about Steve Mara's involvement in it, because I got it from his notes. But I described what Keith Linder said happened before the parapsychologist got there, but I'm not making any claims over whether that really happened or not. I'm just going by what Steve Mara saw and what he recorded.
So what's a little bit of the background to Keith Linder so people can kind of get that set up when they think about these parapsychologists crawling around the house and stuff?
Yeah, well, basically, I mean, he lived in a house in Seattle. The house was only 10 years old, and only a couple people had lived in it beforehand. I think the person that lived there before had also reported some minor paranormal activity. So they're not really sure if it was a poltergeist or if it was an interactive haunting or something, because it seemed to have aspects of both. But apparently, Keith moved in with his girlfriend, Tina, in, I believe it was 2014, and they said that paranormal activity started pretty much immediately. They said the first day they were there, they heard a little girl coughing upstairs. And after that, they started having a lot of weird noises. Things were moving. They saw plants levitating, bowls levitating. And they had a couple incidents of spontaneous outbreaks of fire, usually in Bibles. Keith had a collection of Bibles. He collected old Bibles. And he would find that actually the most dramatic was the fire alarm went off in the middle of the night. And he and Tina got up and they smelled smoke, and they opened the bedroom door, and there was a Bible laying on the floor in front of the bedroom door and was open, and it was burning. It was on fire.
Was it open to a certain page or anything like that?
You know what? I don't know. I didn't ask him. Like I said, I didn't know if it was open to some significant.
Right. Like this poltergeist super hates Leviticus, man. Yeah. So we have to rip those pages out. Just burn it up.
Yeah. It might have been. But he also had really strange things happen, like apportations, like things would appear in his house that weren't his. Like one time it was a wine encyclopedia. A couple times it was like kids' toys. They didn't have any kids. They would just appear in the middle of the floor and they didn't know where they came from.
Oh man, that's a real opportunity that was missed there. You could have your own ghostly personal shopper. I love
that. Right. You just kind of ask it, and then maybe the next day it'll turn up in the house. It's like, wow.
Right. So this kind of brings me to the question. So in the past, we've spoken to author Jeff Holder about his book Poltergeist over Scotland, and he taught us that there have been many varied interpretations of the poltergeist phenomena through the ages, like demons, fairies, ghosts, human agents. And I just want to know, like, what is your take? I mean, we should define poltergeist for people. How would you define it?
I definitely think that it's something to do with a human agent. So in that sense, I don't think it's supernatural, quote unquote, in that it's outside of the natural realm. I think that it's a person producing something that seems like an entity. It's almost like an outward manifestation of like a temper tantrum that is somehow, I'm not sure like what the science would be, how it would be engineered, that a person's emotional state can cause things to happen outside of their body. But I tend to think that that's probably what it is. So in that way, like I said, I'm pretty skeptical about hauntings, like about a ghost of a dead person. So I don't think poltergeist activity is caused by that. But I do think that poltergeists are caused by living people. And I do think that they can mimic a more haunting or ghost type phenomenon, or even a demon type phenomenon. And I think that might have something to do with the person's expectations as well, like what they expect that it's going to act like. And that's why in my new book, The Unseen Hand, where I compiled a whole bunch of cases throughout history, I even put the final section in there is demon possession, because I feel like if you believe that this thing is a demon, then it will act like a demon because it's you generating it, even though you're not aware of it, like unconsciously. And like I said, I kind of came to believe this because, I've sort of believed it before because it seems like most of the parapsychologists are kind of the opinion that that's what's causing it, that this is a living person generating this kind of energy. But I kind of came to that, like I said, mostly talking with Tom, because what was significant about his poltergeist case was that it was so severe when he thought it was an outside entity, but as soon as he figured out this is me doing it, it stopped.
Oh.
Wow.
So he's like, I definitely came to believe that it was him. And it's funny because many years later in the house we live in now, and he's in his 40s now, we had poltergeist activity start again here, very minor. And it's weird because I'd always wanted to see it. And he was like, I always wanted you to see it, because I didn't know him back then. And I did get to see it, like I said, very minor. But it's not scary because I really believe it's him doing it. But he has to be in a certain state of mind. Like he has to not be aware of what's going, like he has to be kind of spaced out.
What's an example of the minor poltergeist activity that you've had around your house? And is this recently, or like the past couple of years, or something like that, or like what happened?
It was probably like 6 months to a year ago, and it's weird because we hadn't had any. We been talking about the book a lot and stuff like that. It so happened that I remember the first time it happened. It was a Sunday night. Me and Tom were here. His mom was here, and two of our friends were here. And we were trying to watch a movie on our pay-per-view, and we couldn't get it to work and all this other stuff. And Tom's mom was like, well, I'll call customer service and see what's going on and everything. So she's on the phone. We're all me and Tom are sitting on one couch, and our friends were sitting on the other couch. And all of a sudden, the remote control that was on the coffee table, it suddenly picked itself up and flew off the floor. It flew through the air, and it fell to the floor with a really loud bang, like it was like a brick or something, even though it's just a little plastic thing that weighs a couple of ounces.
And what kind of flooring did it fall on?
It's carpet. Yeah.
So it sounded like a brick, even though it's a little flimsy plastic thing.
Yeah.
Like you would imagine a controller would be, like everybody's familiar with.
Yeah.
And it's on carpet. And it sounded like a brick hit the floor. Wow.
And it didn't bounce. Because of course, first thing was we all sat there, like I looked at it and I was like, oh, maybe someone kicked the table, even though no one was close enough to kick the table. And there was other stuff on the table and nothing else had moved. And so I looked across at my friends. I was like, did you guys just see that? And they were looking at me and their eyes were like huge. And they were just like,
They're
yeah,
like,
that
what
just,
did you do?
they're like, that
You
just moved
opened a
by
portal,
itself.
didn't you?
Right. I was like, oops, my bad. But yeah. So then I turned to Tom and he was kind of spaced out because he was mad about the movie not starting. And I was like, did you do that? And he looks and he's like, oh, I guess. Like he's like, yeah, I guess I kind of did that. He's like, I wasn't really thinking about it. And he's like, and I only saw it move out of my peripheral vision. And his mom was across the room and she was looking at me like that, like, what the hell? You know what I mean? And so then we went and we're like, okay, we got to be scientific about this, right? So we pick up the remote control and I'm like, okay, now drop it from that height. And he dropped it and it goes click and it bounced. I was like, okay, that's not what happened. I was like, it flew. It was like a trajectory and it went
like an arc?
Wham. Yeah, it was almost like I want to say it was almost like there was a magnet underneath that was like sucking it because it didn't bounce or anything. It just went, you know what I mean? And it just hit the ground. And I was like, that is the weirdest thing. And Tom's like, oh, you guess you've seen it. You know, I was like, that was it.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, that was pretty cool. And then his friends were like, do it again, Tom.
Right.
But it doesn't really work that way, does it?
No, it doesn't. And Tom's like, no. He's like, I don't.
He's not an Avenger.
What I'm interested in is,
darn.
you were saying that his mother was in town, and then most of the stuff happened when he was 13. Like, there's something in Allison and my mother that brings out the poltergeist in me. Could it be, could his mother,
Be a trigger.
Be a trigger.
It could be. I mean, another thing that happened, and I actually was at work when this happened, but they both told me about it. And there were a couple other people here too that were friends of his mom's, and him and his mom had an argument. And then he was kind of mad. So he went off in our bedroom. And then all of a sudden in the kitchen, there was this huge crash. And he runs in there and his mom runs in from the other side of the house and her two friends ran in. And what had happened was we have over our stove, we have a set of cabinets and then there's a shelf on top. And there was a bunch of statues up there, little ceramic statues. Two of those statues in the middle had flown off and shattered all over the floor. And the little lip on the shelf had been wrenched off. It was nailed on there. And it was hanging off and it was broken. And Tom's sitting there going, he's like, that couldn't have happened. And he's like, if those had just fallen off, which they wouldn't because they were way back toward the back wall. He's like, if those had just fallen off, they would have fallen right on the stove. But they went out about 7 feet, in the middle of the kitchen floor and broke. And he said, that was probably because I was mad at my mom. We had just had a fight. And then he just went off in the other room and then bam, all of the stuff.
I have to ask you this because I had an experience with objects flying. I don't think it was a poltergeist. I think it was a straight up haunting. But so I was just at a popular haunted spot, which has been closed now for a number of years. And there was a tray of drinking glasses up on a high level surface. And of course, I was there. I had a great meal and then went to the bar to talk to the bartender because those are the guys that hold on to the stories for a place. And this place had decades of stories. So I proceeded in trying to collect some of those new stories. And as we were talking, it was across the room from me that this tray of drinking glasses flew off. And then it did seem like, again, wasn't looking right at it because, I'm talking to somebody. So I'm looking at him in the eye and I didn't expect anything to happen. So I'm not looking over there, but I had noticed it earlier. And, but the way it landed, it seemed like it was an arc. It didn't fall straight down or, just a little bit off of where it had been. It was in the middle of the floor. This was 17 years ago. So I didn't have a phone or anything. I didn't have anything to take pictures, but what I wish it would have done is had a meter tape with me, and I always carry one now in my purse.
Like you do.
In case that will happen again, because what I could have done is measured where it started from and where it ended up, and then I could have had somebody help me with the math to figure out how much force it took to get where it got to, and then it would be obvious whether that force could have come about naturally or not. So I just wanted to tell you that and make that suggestion that if that happens again, take some measurements
and then
send them to
should.
me.
Next time Tom fights with his mom, grab the meter tape immediately. You might need it. Be like, holy crap, let me get to the utility room. Tom, don't yell at her in a second.
So we should say too that poltergeist, I think everybody by now probably knows the word means noisy ghost, and it comes from German, but most people don't know that that word was actually brought into English usage in 1848 by another awesome female researcher just like you, Jenny, named Catherine Crowe. So we have to give her props because that was way back in 1848. Nobody remembers, but we will very soon. Anyway, so poltergeist, that's like, lots of people now believe that it's a human agent. That seems to be in fashion as the interpretation. But I wanted to ask, like, how many cases have you been involved in, Jenny?
Now, really, I don't, other than the cases that I worked with Steve Mara on, I don't go out like into fields and investigate. And other than Tom's case, which I kind of saw up close and personal,
right?
I generally don't go out and investigate. I usually just research cases that have already happened or talk with parapsychologists about their various cases and just kind of compile them. And like I said, other than the poltergeist activity that took place here that I think Tom was responsible for, I have actually never seen any other poltergeist activity. I've never seen any haunting activity that I know of. The house that I spent some of my childhood in, which was my grandfather's house, was supposedly haunted. All my mom and all her siblings had grown up there, and they all reported that their covers had been torn off, that they heard footsteps walking around on the roof all the time and stuff like that. And I was always hoping that I would see something or hear something, and I never did. And I was always really disappointed. And now the house is torn down, so it's not like I can go
man.
Yeah,
but it was torn down by Bigfoots.
Maybe it was.
It came out of the woods and just stomped it into the ground.
So it finally happened.
It's sad. There's a frat house there now.
So how many cases did you cover in your most recent book? I mean, I read it. It's awesome. There's like loads of cases in there.
Yeah, it's
loads.
Yeah, it was actually when I first kind of conceived of the project, because before that I had just written 3 kind of short books that just focused on one case. And then I was thinking, I said, I'd kind of like to do some of like the old school compilation books like William Roll used to do and that kind of stuff. Because I said I loved those when I was growing up. And I said, I really haven't seen a lot of those recently. There's a lot of compilations of ghost stories and stuff like that, but not so much that just focus on poltergeist. So I said, well, I'm going to do one. And my initial outline, I had 50 cases that I was going to do, including a lot of the more well-known ones like Enfield and stuff like that, and then a few more obscure ones. But I found out as I was researching, every time I would research one kind of well-known case, I would find like 10 other ones that I had never heard of. And I was like, oh man, I have to put this in there and I have to put this in there. That's so cool. And so I ended up like having 115 cases or something like that. It was like way more than like twice what I originally intended. But, and honestly, since I've written the book, I've gotten a couple messages that were like, oh, how about this case? Or how about this one? And I was like, oh man, I forgot that one. So now I probably have to do a volume 2 at some stage.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I probably will have to.
A couple of things. Number one, I wanted to get to, what do you think of the famous cases? Because I know you said you talk about the Bell Witch and things like that in the book. Of the famous cases, what did you learn when you were researching that maybe you didn't know before, or that most surprised you, or that you feel like, oh my God, people haven't talked about this in this particular case, so I can't wait to do it. Was there any instances in the book or in your research where you found something where you were surprised or shocked even?
I think probably, like I said, I think one of my most favorite cases was the Enfield case. And I think that especially now, since there have been a bunch of movies made about it, I think a lot of people have misconceptions about what actually happened there and who was involved and various other things. And I ended up, for my research, I read Guy Lyon Playfair's book, This House is Haunted, and he was actually there for most of the 18 months that the phenomena went on. And his book was it was actually kind of a model for my own books, because I liked the way it was so matter of fact, and he didn't exaggerate anything. He was just like, this day and this happened and this happened. And he didn't really try to explain it or anything. He was just documenting what had happened. And between that and also Morris Gross, who was the other investigator, I kind of feel like that is probably the best attested case. And it would make me sad if people would go see like The Conjuring 2 or would see the BBC miniseries that they made that was called The Enfield Haunting, that was based on it, which was pretty good, although I thought the third part was kind of wildly exaggerated. But it would make me sad if people thought that the case was fake because they thought it happened like it happened in the movies. And it didn't really happen anything like that. I mean, most of the manifestations were fairly minor. And Janet and Margaret, the two girls, they were caught faking on one or two occasions, which kind of made a lot of skeptics say, well, they were faking all of the phenomena then. But there was so much I mean, like I said, Morris Gross, Guy Lyon Playfair, and, some other reporters and stuff were there all the time.
And of course, the very truthful Ed and Lorraine Warren were there.
Yeah,
and they wouldn't
for
have lied
like a minute.
They wouldn't have lied about anything.
They turned up one day. Everyone that was on the Enfield case said they turned up one day uninvited, and were basically like, hey, maybe we could make a lot of money off this or whatever. And then the other people were like, yeah, no, get out. And then they left.
Yeah.
So I thought it was funny that they made The Conjuring 2 like based like they were the main characters. It's like they weren't even there. They just showed up and then left the same day. But,
just trying to get to the truth in this field is just really, really difficult.
It really is. Yeah. It is. And it's sad because, like I said, I'm very skeptical. Even a lot of the cases that I wrote about in the book, I don't know if they happened the way that people reported that they happened. Because, people's memories can be faulty. People can see things and attribute it to other things. And, so I tried to kind of keep, editorializing to a minimum. So I was just kind of like, I didn't want to like go through the cases and go, yeah, I don't think it happened like that, whatever. But, because I wasn't there. But, a couple of the cases I did come out and say, this is probably a hoax. I mean, Amityville is probably a hoax. A bunch of people that were involved in it came out later and said it was a hoax. And, things like that. I think the Cock Lane ghost and the Fox sisters.
Oh, yeah, the Fox sisters, totally.
Yeah.
What's the Cock Lane ghost?
It happened in the 1700s in England, and it was this big convoluted thing where there was a guy, and he married his wife's sister. His wife died, and then he wanted to marry her sister, but there was some kind of law where you couldn't marry your sister-in-law even though your wife was dead. I don't know. It was weird. But they moved into this house.
Made his way through the family.
Yeah, I guess so. He's like, hey, I like her too. Awesome. But so they moved into this house and tried not to tell anybody that they weren't married, because that was like really a no-no back then. But the guy who owned the property found out about it. And then he actually wanted to get back at this dude because of some kind of money, like he had loaned him money or something like that. So he started getting his little daughter to knock on the walls with a piece of wood and say it was a ghost. And he got this ghost to say that this guy had killed his wife, that he had poisoned her. And a lot of people believed it. And, he was going to get hanged. I mean, just because this guy had his daughter like knocking on the walls and saying, yeah, she totally, knocking out messages that this guy had killed his wife. And his girlfriend, the wife's sister, she also died later too. She had not tuberculosis, but something like that. And she died of that later. So, this guy was like, yeah, I'll get back at this guy by having this ghost say that he killed both his wives and all this other stuff. And there was like a big court case. And I mean, the guy who was accused eventually got his name cleared. And the guy that faked the ghost actually did go to prison for a little while and had to pay him a bunch of money. But for a while, they thought that the ghost was real. They even called the ghost Scratching Fanny, because that was the name of the second woman. And they said that she was sitting there saying,
Scratching Fanny.
Scratching Fanny would be an awesome name for a band.
It would,
there
yeah.
you go. So, I mean, like fraud and hoaxes, it's just so rampant. And I have investigators that I work with, and they like put poltergeists all down to, fakery. And I've got a little bit of a problem with that. How would you feel about that? Because I do have paranormal investigator friends who are like, in their presentations, they're like, poltergeist, that's all fake.
Yeah, and it's bad because I think a lot of it probably is fake, or maybe not fake in the sense that someone's deliberately trying to perpetrate a fraud, but maybe it's just, misattribution and things like that. But because I think the real thing, and I do think the real thing exists, I just think it's really rare. So I think that a lot of cases that happen, maybe, maybe not as much as is reported. You know what I mean? Like, so I feel like maybe it's kind of 70% of the cases are not necessarily fake, but just misattributions or like some kind of natural explanation that people didn't know. Like, oh, it was, carbon monoxide poisoning or something like that, going on in the house that was causing hallucinations or something. And it's bad because there's so much that you have to rule out before you can get to the bottom of this has to be paranormal, because there's so many other things that it could be. So in that way, I think it's kind of a shame that parapsychologists, there aren't a lot of really serious scientifically based parapsychologists operating anymore, which is why I really kind of value my friendship with Steve Mera, because he's really like that old school kind of, we're going to go with all the tape measures and all the audio thing. And he records everything very meticulously. And he is very quick to say, this is fake. I don't think this is real. This is what this was. But, if he comes up with something inexplicable, he will say, this is probably paranormal. He never comes out and says, this is definitely paranormal, but he says there is no known explanation for this particular piece of data. And I think that's really kind of the best way to be, because there really is, like you said, there really is so much fakery and misidentification and stuff in the field too, which is, like I said, that's what makes it such a shame, because I do think there's some phenomena that needs to be explained, but it's, separating the wheat from the chaff is very hard.
So you think there is some there,
Yeah.
It shouldn't be just throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
There's something there. But,
Yeah.
You understand why, people might reject it. But to me, it's like, but look at how many cases there are going so far back in history. Like you have 115 in yours. Jeff Holder, who we talked to on a previous episode, had like a 134 cases just in Scotland.
Yeah, there were a lot in Scotland.
Yeah. And so what is the deal? I mean, there's just so many things reported. And like Jeff Holder's point too was that they're so weird. Like the things that happen, like if you were going to make something up, you think I don't know, if you have a little bit, make a little bit more sense or have a little bit of more narrative.
Exactly. I mean, that's kind of what sort of got me over from the skeptical side was basically Tom telling about his poltergeist experience. And the stuff that he said happened was just so strange and just so random. And I'm like, why would anybody make something like that up? Why would you even think of that? You know what I mean? Just the stuff that it did was so bizarre.
It's obscure.
Well, speaking of obscure, what's an obscure case that you think that you brought to light in your book that you hadn't heard of before, and you were like, oh my God, like the world needs to know? Like, what was something that was in the unseen hand that may have surprised you that you hadn't heard of before, and you were excited to bring it out?
It's funny because I hadn't, weirdly, even though Australia is an English-speaking country, it seemed like I hadn't heard of a lot of cases from Australia. And then I came across a book where these two paranormal investigators had all of these cases that had happened in Australia, and I had never heard of any of them. And I was like, man, I got to put a couple of these in there too, because I didn't hear of any of these Australian ones. I think probably my favorite one out of that was the Humpty Doo case. And not just because that is a very silly name.
Yes,
for
the dreaded Humpty Doo.
Fanny and the Humpty Doo.
Scratching Fanny and the Humpty Doos. I'm going to go see that band tonight.
I liked them before they were famous, so,
Right.
I'm more. But yeah, so this Humpty Doo case, it's actually fairly recent. It happened in 1998. And it was a bunch of housemates. It was two couples and one of their friends who was like a biker. I think his name was Murph.
Yeah.
And a biker named Murph, and in Humpty Doo. And so, and
you gotta make that stuff up.
Right.
That's what I mean. I don't know. So they all lived together in a house. One of them had one of the couples had a baby daughter. Now, the first thing that started to happen was that they were all sitting out on the porch one evening, drinking beers and hanging out like they did. And all of a sudden, yeah. So like all of a sudden, all these rocks started flying at them from all different directions. And they were kind of like, is somebody out there throwing rocks at us for some reason? What's going on? Because the rocks were the same as the rocks that made up their driveway. So they naturally assumed that someone was out there throwing rocks at them. So they went out and searched around, but they couldn't find anybody. And they're like, okay, that's weird. And then they went and sat back down, and then the rocks came flying at them again. And they're just like, what the hell is going on? So they're like, well, finally, they're like, okay, that's enough. And they went inside. And then when they went inside, the rocks started falling on them inside the house.
Yeah.
And so they're like, well, this is a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
And they searched all around. They were coming out of the ceiling. They said it looked like the rocks were fairly small, but they said it looked like that they were kind of appearing up by the ceiling and then falling.
Like
but
an airport.
Yeah. So they went up to the attic and searched around and stuff like that. There's nothing up there. And they said even though it was raining outside, the rocks inside were dry. So it's like they obviously didn't come from outside because they weren't wet. And so then other things in the house started moving around, like a couple mattresses came flying off, like some of their appliances, a CD player, that kind of thing. And then they started hearing, yeah, the dingoes ate my baby. But yeah, it did actually. But yeah, so then they started, sadly enough. But yeah, so then they started hearing like scratching in the walls and stuff, which is very commonly reported. And so then they started calling. They didn't really know what else to do, so they said, well, let's start calling in the priests, because that's what you do. So they called in a priest. He came from Darwin nearby. And he's like, well, I can't really do an exorcism and yada, yada. He's like, but I'll do a binding ritual, which will ensure that whatever is in the house can't hurt anyone. But apparently whatever was in the house didn't really take too kindly with that, because there had been a knife sitting on top of the, on top of the microwave, and it came flying at him. Although it didn't hit him, but like it came close and then dropped to his feet. So it's almost kind of like a threat,
Ghostly warning shot.
Yeah. So, so that priest was like, well, okay, I've done all I can. Bye. And him being there did seem to help a little bit. I think for the next couple of days, the phenomena died down somewhat. But then it started coming back and the stuff started moving around again. And so they got a different priest to come. And he reported that when he came in the house, he's like, there were bottles flying around. There were bullets flying around, like, just random bullets, not out of a gun or anything like that. And he said they went around corners and stuff like that. He's like defying physics, the stuff that was flying around. So he gave a blessing to the house. He left them a Bible and a crucifix and stuff like that. And he hadn't got too far off the property before there was the bottle of holy water that he left just smashed all over the floor. So then they called another priest who was a Greek Orthodox, and he didn't even get into he didn't even finish the blessing before something tried to like pull the Bible out of his hands and was like twisting his arm behind his back and stuff like that. So then, and this was the weirdest part, then whatever was in the house started spelling things. It would take these little pebbles that were from out in the driveway, and it would make letters. And they said that the way they did it, they said the letters, I've seen the pictures of them, the letters are very clear. And they said often these words would appear on the floor in seconds. Like you would walk through the hall and then you would come back through the hall a couple seconds later and there would be a word there. There's no way that a human being could have arranged these, these words with all these little rocks in a second. And the creepiest thing was that a lot of the words, they didn't, on their face, they didn't really appear to make any sense. One of the words was fire. One of them was Troy and things like that. But the weird thing is that shortly before the poltergeist activity started, their friend Troy had been killed in a car accident. He had hit something and the car had caught fire and he had burned to death. So they thought, oh, well, the poltergeist is commenting on. They didn't think that it was caused by their friend, like the ghost of their friend, even though a lot of the manifestations seemed to relate to him. They thought that, they said, well, because, our friend Troy wouldn't do that. It's like, why would he scare us like that? And that's creepy.
Throw a knife at a priest.
Right, exactly. They're like,
Troy was a jerk when he was drunk, but he didn't try to stab priests.
Right, now he's like writing all over our floor with rocks. Wow, but you know what I mean? So I thought that was kind of interesting that they didn't immediately jump to, oh, it's Troy's ghost. They said, oh, well, it's a poltergeist and it's using that, it's using Troy's death to upset us. So they were actually, astute enough to come to that conclusion. But there were other things too, like sometimes it would make like little trident shapes and stuff like that. And like I said, it spelled words like help and stuff. But
did it ever spell Humpty-Doo?
It did not.
Are we going to get to why they're calling it Humpty-Doo?
Well,
you know what? I don't know why.
Isn't that just the place where they were? Or
yeah.
Oh, that was the name of the town.
That was the name of the town. That was the name of the town.
Oh my God, they need more things to do in Australia, don't they?
Australia really has the best town names. They're so rad.
So I wanted to ask you, like, when I was reading The Unseen Hand, it's just awesome. I have the Kindle, I have the Audible, and I'm going to have to get the print copy, which I'm going to have to get you to sign at some point.
Okay.
Because I just think it's such a valuable, like, reference book of, like, how you categorized it by the different types of manifestation. Could you talk a little bit about that and why you decided to do that?
Okay. Yeah. Oh, and I'm really glad that you said that it was like a reference, because that's really what I wanted. Out of this, I was like, because I wanted something. I was like, if you're interested in poltergeist, here's like a one-stop shop kind of book where you can just read about most of the cases and theories about what causes them and stuff like that.
Yeah, like if you're interested in fire starters, you can just go to that area.
It's funny because when I initially conceived the book, like I said, and it only had 50 cases when I first started out, and you see how that escalated. But initially I was going to put them just in chronological order. And then I started thinking to myself, as I started researching the cases and writing about them, I was like, these could fall into various categories. And there was a lot of overlap, obviously. So some of the cases I was like, well, which section should I put it in? Because both this and that happened. But what I wanted to do, I said, I think it would be a better read if I kind of ramped up the manifestation, like if they got worse as the book went on. So I said, so it's more like a fiction kind of thing where it's like building up to a crescendo. I said, I think it would be a better read like that. And I said, and I think it'll be a better way for people to find their particular case. Because when I first started writing them in chronological order, I was like, well, they're kind of all over the place. Like here's like a really minor one and here's like a super bad one. And, it just seemed like it didn't really, I don't know, it just seemed kind of disjointed. And I thought it would be instructive too, because people could see not only how far back in history reports of this type of phenomena are and how similar a lot of the accounts are, even going back, thousands of years, but they could also see the similarities between, of the various manifestations, like why do poltergeists drop stones in people's houses? Because that happens a lot. Why do they scratch at the walls? Why is there kind of this set of behaviors that most of them seem to adhere to. Like, you don't really get ones doing like completely crazy random things. It's always one of these kind of set behaviors. And I thought that was really kind of interesting. And so I wanted to categorize them in that way so people could see, oh, here's ones where they all started fires, and here's one where they made it rain inside, and here's one where stones fell on the house and stuff like that. And it was so interesting to me how many of each type of case there was. It was actually pretty easy to categorize a lot of them. A few of them were, like I said, kind of sketchy, and I wasn't really sure. And like the worst they got, I was like, well, I'm just going to put the worst ones like in the violent poltergeist. If it was poltergeist, they were like hitting people and pushing them downstairs and whatnot. So I said, so they'll just get worse as they go along, because that's how a lot of actual poltergeist outbreaks occur. They start with very minor things, doors opening and closing and knocks on the walls and stuff like that, and then eventually ramp up to stuff flying around and sometimes people getting bitten and pushed and stuff like that. So I wanted the book to read as though it was like a poltergeist outbreak happening, I guess.
And there's a reason, that the Tasmanian Devil is the last story in Creepshow.
Right.
You want to get to the scariest, or, that they have, or horror at 20,000 feet is the end of Twilight Zone, the movie. When you get to the end of something, you want the scariest thing. You want to leave, and so as a reader, it can be a reference, and it can be entertainment too, because like now we'd read it as a reference. Could be like, well, I'd be interested in this one and maybe some more research on it. But when you're 13, you want to read it like it's a Stephen King story, but it's real. That's the part that makes it scary. So I assume you saved you saved the big finish for the end, like the poltergeist that stab people while they're sleeping, little boy.
Yeah, all the violent and demonic ones are at the end. The ones where people were flying around and, having words appear on their skin and stuff like that. Those are, nice. So I saved those at the end. But that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted it to be a reference book, but I also wanted it to be an entertaining read if you were interested in that type of thing, where you could just read it straight through or pick and choose.
Yeah, and it's certainly all of those things. I mean, it's just a wonderful, like you said, a reference guide, but it's also exciting. So, and just the research that took, I really admire that.
Well, thank you very much.
And have you used your research for any of, you're also, a fiction writer. Have you used some of that, of what you've researched into strange experiences? Has that helped you create maybe more realistic and scary settings for your horror fiction?
It probably has, yeah. Because I really because it's weird because I kind of compartmentalize the two things. I think my horror fiction kind of comes from a totally different place than my paranormal nonfiction for some reason, but there is some crossover. I haven't actually written much fiction in a while because I've been writing so much nonfiction and working on the podcast and things like that. So, but really, I mean, the most recent thing I'm writing fiction-wise, I definitely did utilize some of the things that I came across when I was researching some of the cases in terms of just kind of telekinetic ability and things like that. So I'm kind of hoping that it will make the fiction better by grounding it more in reality and making it seem like it could really happen, which hopefully will make it scarier, but we'll see how it comes out.
When you say that the horror fiction comes from a separate place, well, what kind of place is that?
The deep, dark, horrible black place. But yeah, I don't know. It's like, it's kind of hard to explain. I kind of have, I don't know, like I kind of have these sort of two halves of my brain, I guess. I mean, I know everyone has two halves of their brain. But
right. I have
metaphorically. Yeah. Right. Oh my God. But yeah, so it's almost kind of like I have this really, really Spock-like rational sort of thing, and that's kind of what I tap into.
It's the bangs.
Yeah. But yeah, that's what I tap into when I write my nonfiction. When I write my fiction, I kind of go into subconscious mode. Like I use nightmares a lot, like nightmares that I've had as a jumping off point. And I usually, when I write fiction, I mean, when I write my nonfiction, I'm very present and I'm like, up with my research and everything like that. When I write my fiction, I almost kind of go into, not a trance really, but I try to get to a place where I'm not thinking about what I'm writing. And, where I just kind of
like feeling it.
Yeah, where I just kind of put words on the page. I'm like, I'll fix it later if it sucks. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. So, and I actually got that idea from Stephen King, because before that I was trying to write fiction like I write my nonfiction. Like I was outlining everything and doing all these big, long character things. And it just wasn't working for me. I'd never finish anything. It sounded really rote and mechanical. And then I read Stephen King's book on writing. And he's like, man, he's like, I just think of an idea and then just run with it. I don't like outline anything. And I was like, maybe I should try that. And I'm like, hey, it works. You know what I mean? It works better when you don't think about it. Well, at least for me.
And that, because I was just wondering, because when you think about the different, the conflicts of fiction, when you're talking about the nonfiction, the even though it be a nonfiction story, the conflict be man versus or human versus supernatural or whatever. And so when you're thinking about your horror, is it primal horror? Is it supernatural horror? Is it body horror? Like that's what I was just trying to think about when you come about the things that scare you. Are the things that scare you bumps in the night, or is it serial killers, or what scares you?
You know what's really strange, and Tom and I talk about this a lot, because like I said, I'm a huge horror fan. Now, if I am watching a horror movie, even though I'm very skeptical about ghosts and demons and stuff like that, if a horror movie is going to scare me, it's going to be about that. It's going to be like a ghost story or something. And it's funny because the movies that scare him are things that are realistic, things that could really happen. Things like, torture porn type, Wolf Creek, that kind of thing. He's like, is this serial killers? They're real. And I was like, I know they're real and they're scary from an academic standpoint, I guess. But when I see movies about them, I'm just like, meh. It doesn't scare me. I don't know why. And that's like,
Hannibal, you eat people. How boring.
Yeah, whatever.
Oh, gosh.
Right. And it's like,
fava beans, whatever.
I did love Silence of the Lambs, I gotta say. Honestly, the scariest movies I've ever seen are David Lynch movies. For some reason, David Lynch movies give me the heebie-jeebies. I love him, though. I love all his movies. But seriously, Mulholland Drive, Inland Empire, those are like two of the creepiest movies I've ever seen. I had nightmares about those for weeks. And I don't know how he does it. I'm just like, it's very... But I like really ambiguous horror where they don't really show much. You're not really sure if there's a ghost or if someone's just crazy. And then I like really unsettling kind of stuff.
Like the turn of the screw.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, like Haunting of Hill House. The movie they made of that in 1963 is one of my favorite horror movies. And stuff where you're like really not sure what's going on. Like I love The Shining. I love Roman Polanski's movies like Repulsion and The Tenant and stuff like that. Because you're not really, everything's ambiguous. You're not sure. It's like, is someone just messing with him? Is he crazy? Is it haunted? And they don't really tell you. And I have to say that I'm mostly an old school kind of horror chick. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. So a lot of my favorite horror movies are from that era. But I have to say, I was like, well, I don't want to be like one of those crotchety old people. It's just like, I only like old movies. These new movies, there's these stupid millennials, blah, blah, blah.
All those computer graphics. It's like watching a cartoon.
Get off my lawn. I didn't want to be like that. So I said, well, a few months ago, because I write a blog too called Goddess of Hellfire that's more horror based. And I said, I'm going to start reviewing some newer movies, but I don't have a lot of time. So it's like, I don't want to sit around watching a bunch of stupid movies. So I go online and I'm like, okay, what are really good horror movies that have come out like in the last 10 years, And then, so I go on Netflix and I look through them, and there are a really lot of awesome horror movies come out that are kind of throwbacks to the old. And I like gore. I mean, it doesn't scare me, but I enjoy watching it.
A good special effect is, great. It's
right.
always
it's like,
the joy forever.
Right. It's like, and I love that kind of stuff. Like I was a big Lucio Fulci fan back in the day. Like I love all his zombie movies with all the eyeballs popping out. I love that stuff. But it doesn't scare me though. It's not scary. It's entertaining and it's fun, but it's not scary. Like I said, if something's going to scare me, it's going to be something. And like I said, some newer ones I saw that, there's this great one. I don't know if you've seen it. I think it came out in 2015 or 2016 called They Look Like People. Have you seen that?
Oh, no, I haven't seen They Look Like People.
Oh, it's awesome. It's actually about, there's no supernatural in it. It's actually about a guy who has schizophrenia. And the suspense of it is wondering, is seeing things through his eyes, because he thinks people are demons, and he thinks people are being taken over by demons, and that he has to do something about it. So a lot of the suspense comes from seeing things the way he sees them, and also wondering what's going to happen to his friends when he thinks that they've been taken over by demons. And there's a lot of really like unsettling kind of imagery in it, but it's really, really good. But yeah, I liked that a lot. That one, and I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House, which was a ghost story that came out a couple years ago. And that's very Shirley Jackson. It's almost kind of like, yeah, it's almost kind of like, and I saw another reviewer say this, and I'm like, yeah, that's a perfect description. They said if David Lynch had directed a remake of The Haunting of Hill House, they're like, it would be like that. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly right. And because as soon as I saw that in a review, I was like, that's the movie for me right there. So
well, we'll definitely have to check that out. And the thing is, we'll also have to link to Goddess of Horror.
Goddess of Hellfire is my
Goddess of Hellfire. I'm sorry, Goddess of Hellfire. Yes. But we will be linking to that in the show notes that you guys can find. And so make sure you check that out. And also, Jenny, where can people find out more about you? Where can they find out more about your books and your blog and your podcasts?
Oh my gosh, I'm everywhere. Okay, so my main hub site is just www.jennyashford.com, and that has links to pretty much everything. All my books are available on Amazon. I have an author page on there. All of the paranormal nonfiction is available in print, ebook, and audiobook. The horror fiction is available in print and ebook. I haven't got around to doing audio of my horror fiction yet, although I hope to eventually. Yeah. And
it's Sunday, so you got a whole week to do it.
I know, right? I know, God, they take so long. But yeah, so, and also myself and Tom Ross, who I wrote Mammoth Mountain Poltergeist with, we have a weekly podcast called 13 O'Clock. And we kind of, it's very informal. It's very fun. We swear a lot. We kind of just randomly pick weird topics. We do true crime. We do paranormal cases. We just do crazy stuff. Like we did one on like creepy spy stuff, like number stations and that kind of thing. We did one about like
number stations.
Yeah. So we did one about Nazis and the occult and all that kind of stuff. And so it comes out every Tuesday. We have a YouTube channel, which is called 13 O'Clock Podcast. And you can also get it on WordPress, 13 O'Clock Podcast. And I think it's on iTunes. I hope. We just switched networks, and I'm like not sure if the new RSS feed is up to date, because I'm really not tech savvy about that kind of thing. So I try to do all this stuff myself, and I'm not sure if anyone's getting it, but you know what I mean? It's pretty easy to find.
We will certainly link to it.
Yeah, it's easy to find.
Well, sounds good. But thank you for sharing your time and story with us today, Jenny. And then we're going to have to talk to you more in the future, because it sounds like not only we have Poltergeist, I'm sure we have a lot of horror movies and paranormal inspirations and things to talk about later.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Thank you so much.
Aw, thank you.
For this week's song, we decided to go into one of the dozens of poltergeist stories that Jenny writes about in The Unseen Hand. It's the famous story of the Bell Witch, made into a film as an American haunting, and deserving of an episode in its own right, because there's much more than meets the initial eye to this story. We take the poem Queen of the Haunted Dell from M.V. Ingram's work Authenticated History of the Bell Witch from 1894. Now, Ingram knew the Bell family and compiled as much information as he could about it, including their own journals, and he released them after the last of the family who this happened to passed away. He was a journalist and not a poet, but he was inspired to add a poem to his book, and we use that as a basis for lyrics for this episode's track, Queen of the Haunted Dell.
Mid-woodland bowers, a grassy dell, by an enchanted murmuring stream. 12 pretty blue-eyed Betsy Bell sweetly thrilled with love's young dream. Life was like a magic spell that guides a laughing stream. Sunbeams glimmering on her fell, kissed by lunas kissed by lunar silvery gleam. But elfin phantomess cursed the dale, and sylvan witches all unseen. As our tale will truly tell, wielded scepter of the queen. Life was like a magic spell that guides a laughing stream. Sunbeams glimmering on her veil, kissed by lunar silvery gleam. Oh, but elven phantom mass cursed the dale, and sylvan witches all unseen. As our tale will truly tell, wielded scepter over queen.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
Ooh, 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 don't you dare think that we forgot about our Patreon community. That's right. That's the community that keeps See You on the Other Side podcast in business with their awesome, wonderful donations. And we'd like to do a special shout out to Dr. Ned. Dr. Ned is at the level of patronship where he gets a shout out in every single episode. So once again, thank you very much for your support, Dr. Ned. And thank you to all our awesome Patreons who make this show possible. If you're interested in joining the See You on the Other Side and Sunspot Patreon community, please visit othersidepodcast.com/donate, and we'll see you on the other side. We'll all do it at the same time.
Okay.
At the same time.
One, two, three.
There we go.
Okay, that's how we do it.